A question I get a lot is, how many cows can I run on my land? Well, in our area, that seems to be about 40 acres. A lot of people buy a 40-acre tract, and then they want to stock that. They go online and they simply Google, how many cows can I run on 40 acres? And whatever Google spits out, that's what they do. Well, who knows where that information's coming from? You know, that could be information from California or Nebraska or Louisiana. Who knows, right? So you got to figure out the specifics to your area, your land, your soil type, your rainfall, all of those things. Something else, when you simply Google how many cows can I run on my land, and you put in that amount of land, is it's not taking into account ponds, creeks, woods, all of that, buildings, all that stuff has to be removed so you get an accurate accounting of how much actual available land that you have to use. So today I'm going to show you a simple way to actually figure it using forage production instead of just guessing. And the reason this question matters so much is this is one of the quickest ways to ruin a good pasture. Overgrazing or undergrazing. You know, if you're overgrazing, the cattle are taking too much forage from that land and it can't keep up. And if you're undergrazing, you're wasting resources. So the goal is to match the number of animals to how much forage your land can produce. We're going to break that down on the whiteboard. Here's a simple look at some of this out here right now. Maybe we've got some good growth coming up here. We've also got some less desirables popping up. We've still got leftover grasses from last year. So that tells me that we didn't really overgraze this, but maybe we did undergraze it a little bit. All right, let's go to the whiteboard and see what the math tells us. So how many cows can 40 acres support? We want to use forage, not guesses. With the information we have, we know 40 acres here will give us an estimated forage capacity of 5,000 pounds per acre. So if we take 40 acres, our estimated pounds of forage per acre is 5,000 pounds. 40 times 5,000, that's 200,000 pounds of forage that 40 acres can grow. Now the cows aren't going to get to eat all of that 200,000 pounds. Some of that's going to get trampled, some's going to get wasted, some of it has to be left there for regrowth. So here we work off a rule of thumb of take half, leave half. So out of that 200,000 pounds, we're going to bank on 100,000 pounds. So the math going forward will reflect the 100,000 pounds. So part of the calculation in figuring out how many cows you can run on your land is you have to understand what an animal unit is. I've got some animals behind me, as you can see. So an animal unit is basically one 1,000 pound cow and her calf. So when we do the math, that's what we work off of. For our example, I'm using information that I simply found on the Oklahoma State University Extension Office. And that is an animal unit can consume around 26 pounds of forage a day. So then we have to figure that up over the year. One cow can eat 26 pounds per day. 26 times 365, that equals 9,490 pounds per year. We're going to round up to 9,500 pounds for our example to keep the math simple. So now we divide the usable forage by what one cow eats in a year. So that's going to be 100,000 pounds divided by 9,500 pounds. And that's going to equal 10.5 cows. Now that does not mean every 40-acre place here can support 10 cows. That's going to depend on the rainfall, your pasture quality, fertility, grazing management, and hay feeding. If you're feeding hay, that's going to change some numbers. One thing that also changes stocking rate is feeding hay. For us, that's about 120 days a year. We usually plan on feeding from sometime around Thanksgiving to the 1st to the 15th of April. That's usually a pretty good calculation that's right more times than it is wrong. So that gives us 245 days of grazing. So if we take the 26 pounds per cow that they eat of forage a day and multiply that by 245 days a year, 6,370 pounds a year. Then if we take 100,000 pounds, divide that by 6,370, we're going to divide that by 6,370 pounds. That equals 15.7 cows. It does not mean that the pasture quality just magically improved. It means hay is carrying part of the load. So after all the math, and we broke down all those numbers, we end up with, if we're banking on this 40 acres solely to feed these cows, then we can put about 10 cows on that 40 acres. That's not feeding hay. So if we change that up and we put some hay in there and we feed hay about 120 days a year, we can bump those numbers up to about 14 to 15 cows on that 40 acres. Now that example gives us a starting point, but real ranches don't work off a whiteboard. For example, this one pasture here is 320 acres, and we typically run 70 animal units per year. Now that number could change depending on some factors: rainfall, grass production, how well our grass is doing, and feeding hay. Have we had a good year in the hay field and we're going to have a lot of extra hay? Well, then we know we could probably bump that average up. Now, there may be some years we have to pull the numbers back on this piece of property right here. So all that to say, stocking rate isn't a fixed number. It fluctuates. Like I've talked about in the past, this ranch right here, this piece of property has been in production since 1960. So we've got a lot of data, a lot of years of data on that. So we know, generally speaking, about 70 animal units is what this can handle. Now, there's years where that's tight. We're going to feed more hay. There's years where it's not enough, and we're out here helping to manage this land. So the cattle aren't just managing it, we are. And that is out here, we have to brush hog some years. You know, keep it down. Keep less desirable plant material from coming in. So you have to know your land. You have to keep records. You just simply have to look at the data. As much as I don't want this to be a data-driven venture, I just want to come out here, feed cows, take care of them, because that's what I love to do. It has to be data-driven. Unless you're working from some endless bank account, right? You know, what is that old saying? The fastest way to make $1 million in the cattle business is to start with 2 million. That's true. So the common mistake I see new people making is they ask the question, how many cows can I run on these acres? When the better question is, how much forage can these acres produce? Because two farms that are both 40 acres could produce wildly different numbers. I see it so many times around here. Somebody will come in, they'll buy 20 acres, they'll buy a 40-acre piece of land, they'll build a house, they'll build a shop, they'll build roads on it. All that stuff's taking away from how many acres are available to produce forage. They'll go in there, and they're excited. I get that. They've been able to have this dream. They've been able to achieve this dream that they might have had. And they will go in and they'll just way overstock this pasture. And they end up, what I see end up happening is, I'll drive by a place like this, say it's 20 acres, a lot of it's woods, not much grazable area, and they'll put 10 animal units in there and a bull. Well, you know, for that first year or so, that may be okay. But what that ends up turning into is a dry lot situation where they're feeding hay year round. And these animals have no natural place to go graze. They just end up laying around a hay bale 24 hours a day. That's just not how we do things here. I want these animals to be able to get out and graze, do their natural thing. You know, I don't think it's fair to the animal to be put into that situation. That's probably why I'm kind of passionate about this and I'm making this video. I'm really curious to hear from you guys. How many cows per acre do you run in your area where you're from? Leave it in the comments. How many acres per cow are you running? And if you're not raising cattle yet and it's part of your dream and what you're trying to get to, now you have some more information on how to better figure your numbers. And we're going to end it here for the day, guys. I appreciate you guys watching. You know, if it wasn't for you all, we couldn't do what we're doing out here as far as the social media stuff. You know, every day I see our numbers tick up and tick up and tick up just a little bit. And that's fine with me. I'm not looking for some big explosive growth. I'm a slow and steady wins the race kind of guy. So every day I get on YouTube or Facebook or TikTok, any of those, and I see our numbers going up, 1 or 2 people, that gets me excited. It keeps me coming out here making these videos. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share it with a friend. Let's work to get this message out.